The story is set in 1930 in Paris. Papillon is a master safecracker. It doesn't take him long to steal diamonds from the safes he cracks. Next, Papi heads to a nightclub. There he meets a mafia boss named Castilli. Castilli, who is torturing a pimp named Roland Legrand for reporting him to the police, buys 7 stolen diamonds from Papi for €10,000. After pocketing the money, Papi calls his girlfriend, Nanette. Nanette is an entertainer at the club. After the show, Papi gives Nanette a diamond necklace and asks her to leave with him. Unbeknownst to Papillon, Castilli's men see them with the diamond necklace. The next morning, Nanette urges Papi to leave Paris and live a simple life in the countryside. However, Papi asks for 6 months to gather more money first. Suddenly, the police arrive and arrest Papillon. He is accused of murdering Roland Legrand, the pimp who was tortured by Castilli the previous night. The next morning, Nanette visits Papi and advises him to appeal. However, Papi knows that the line between the police and criminals is blurred. Papi plans to escape and asks Nanette to forget him. Meanwhile, he is approached by Hulot, a daring robber who advises him to bring money for the escape. Next, during the inspection, Papi and Julot notice Louis Degas, a millionaire arrested for forging bonds. These convicts will be transferred to Camp de la Transportation, a prison in Guyana. During the journey, Degas' wife and lawyer inform him that they will appeal, and Degas could be home by Christmas. Upon boarding the prison ship, Papi and Julot arranged a place for Degas. Papi offered to be his bodyguard in exchange for money to escape, but in such a situation, Louis Degas found it hard to trust anyone and eventually refused Papi's offer. That night, while Degas was asleep, a vicious criminal slit the belly of the inmate next to Degas just to take his money. And ironically, the police there took a portion of the money as well. Soon after, the police threw the inmate's body into the sea without a second thought. Remembering the incident the next morning, Degas continuously followed Papillon out of fear. Eventually, Degas agreed to hire Papillon as his bodyguard until he was released on appeal. That night, the vicious criminal struck again, this time targeting Louis Degas. Papi quickly took him down. The criminal did not know who attacked him and started hitting randomly. Shortly after, the police sprayed hot air and searched all the prisoners. Eventually, Papi was moved to first class, with his hands and feet tied like a wild animal. A few days later, the ship arrived at the port. Hulot carried out a crazy idea by cutting his leg so he could enter the hospital. Next, the prisoners were escorted to Camp de la Transportation. They were all gathered in a field, and the prison warden gave a speech next to a guillotine. He said that anyone who tried to escape would be isolated for 2 years. The second offense would result in 5 years. And if a prisoner dared to kill a guard, they would be executed immediately. As usual, Papi chose a corner spot to protect Degas. Uniquely, one prison cell was filled with many inmates. After securing a spot, Papi approached the room head and requested a job in the hospital. The room head demanded a fee of €1,000, paid in cash without negotiation. Without hesitation, Degas immediately took out the money and paid him. That night, the prisoners slept with their feet shackled. In the morning, Degas' hand was bleeding from animal bites, and it turned out their cell was also inhabited by blood-sucking bats. Then the guards shouted that a prisoner had escaped. Next, they would be working in the hospital. But unfortunately, the deputy warden transferred them to Crucero. Crucero was a rock quarry, and they resembled slaves more than prisoners. Degas, who was unaccustomed to hard labor, became exhausted and started feeling unwell. Degas experienced diarrhea, causing the money he stored in his stomach to fall out. Papi immediately stopped pushing the trolley and searched for the money. Fortunately, Papi found it again. During the break, they rested while waiting for lunch. Suddenly, an inmate beside Degas died from exhaustion. Without hesitation, a senior prisoner took the dead man's bread ration and shared it with Papi. While they were chatting, an inmate threatened Degas. Papillon quickly stepped in to fend him off. On their way, they encountered a group of hired women and a pimp asking for a ride. Papi inquired about the boat from the pimp. The pimp set a price of €5,000 for the boat ride and mentioned that he would leave for Spain in 3 days after finishing his work. Papi and Degas cleaned themselves up, but the man who had previously helped Degas still held a grudge. He came with 2 friends to settle the score. Although Papi was injured by a knife slash, he managed to knock out his 3 attackers. Unfortunately, in the prison cell, after learning that his wife's appeal had failed, Dega began to consider escaping with Papi. The next day, the prisoners were gathered in the yard. They were all ordered to kneel, and the warden announced that a prisoner, Hulot, had tried to escape by killing 2 guards. Hulot was killed, and he was executed by guillotine. Coincidentally, Papillon was assigned to carry Hulot's corpse. Despite Degas' reluctance, Papillon insisted on bringing him along because the bodies of deceased prisoners were thrown into the sea as fish bait. Naturally, Degas, a millionaire unaccustomed to heavy lifting, was forced by the guards with a whip to carry Hulot's body. Papi seized the opportunity to escape. The 2 guards chased Papillon to the riverbank, while Degas was left feeling frustrated and abandoned by Papillon. That night, Papi met the pimp who was about to leave, but Papi had no money. He promised to pay once they reached France. Unexpectedly, Papillon walked into the pimp's trap. Papillon was taken back to the camp, and luckily the guard he had beaten did not die, so he was sentenced to 2 years of isolation on Saint-Joseph Island. It was said that many prisoners went insane after being isolated on that island, and the only food they received was soup that tasted like dishwater. Papi even had to hold his breath to swallow it. After several days, the guard Papi had beaten came to his cell for revenge. A few days later, someone left an old coconut in Papi's bucket. It was from Louis Degas. The old coconut was the only nutrition Papi could get. However, a few days later, when Papi went to retrieve his bucket, the guards killed the prisoner who had delivered the coconut. Papillon was then interrogated by the head guard, who demanded to know who sent the coconut. Papi remained silent. Cruelly, the warden ordered the guards to reduce Papi's food rations. Day by day, Papi became more malnourished, and his body grew thinner. Whenever he peeked outside, he saw corpses being dragged away to be thrown into the sea. In a state of starvation, the warden unexpectedly visited Papi with a bowl of meat soup. It was a bribe to get him to confess. Instead of complying, Papillon fed the warden the soup. Unsatisfied with Papillon's suffering, the warden blocked all sources of light in Papillon's cell. Rather than dying, Papi began hallucinating and saw a safe in front of him. As an expert safecracker, he tried to open it but failed this time. He gave up, having no idea how to unlock it. But suddenly the safe opened on its own. Day after day passed, and Papi had spent 2 years in solitary confinement before 2 guards took him to the infirmary. Meanwhile, Degas was employed as an administrator in the prison. Knowing that Papillon had been released from isolation, Degas headed to the infirmary to visit him. There, he was very saddened to see Papi in such a weakened state. He then revealed that his appeal had never been filed by his wife, and now his wife and lawyer had married. They lived happily with the wealth they had accumulated throughout their lives. Suddenly, Papi responded. It turned out he was pretending to be insane to be taken to the hospital. Degas revealed the prison schedule, noting that a movie would be shown on Sunday, which would be the perfect time for them to escape. Next, Papi continued to act insane to be given sedatives. Papi intentionally collected the sedatives. That night, Papi heard noises in the bathroom. A guard was trying to assault a male inmate there. After the guard left, Papi approached the man, who was named Maturette, imprisoned for murder. Papi then invited Maturette to join their escape plan, with his task being to distract the guards. The next day, Papi pretended to be insane to get into the infirmary. He had contacted a boat seller who requested a down payment. Louis Degas gave Papi the last of his money. Papi tasked Degas with mixing sedatives into the guard's coffee. However, when Degas was about to do so, another inmate seized the sedatives. Degas, unable to fight, bit the inmate's hand to retrieve the sedatives. At that moment, their backgrounds were revealed. Degas was beaten by his father as a child, while Papillon was the son of a teacher. That night, during the movie screening, their plan commenced. They mixed the sedatives into a bottle and combined it with water. Maturette lured the toilet guard into a romantic encounter while Papi dismantled the bed frame to use as a weapon. Meanwhile, Degas poured the mixture into the guard's coffee. Papi and Cellier then subdued the toilet guard. They proceeded to take down the other guards. Unexpectedly, it started raining, and the guests were ushered inside for shelter. Cellier began to panic because Degas still hadn't appeared, but it turned out that Degas had cut the power and stolen the key to the main door. They navigated through the guards' patrol route to the back tower, then jumped down to escape. Unfortunately, Degas sprained his ankle, slowing them down. In the forest, they were helped by a group of people who turned out to be the boat sellers. The boat seller immediately demanded the remaining payment. Papi and Luis Degas were initially skeptical, but after paying, it turned out the seller was honest. They prepared the boat and set sail in the morning. The sea was very calm, but by noon their boat began leaking and the rudder broke. In the panic, Cellier, who had disliked Luis Degas from the beginning, wanted to get rid of him, believing Degas was a useless burden on the boat. Moments later, the sea calmed down significantly. However, a massive storm loomed ahead, making Cellier more eager to get rid of Degas to lighten their boat's load. A fight broke out, and Luis Degas, losing patience, repeatedly stabbed Cellier. They threw Cellier overboard, but their boat kept drifting closer to the storm. When Papi awoke, he found himself on an island with primitive inhabitants. He soon met a nun who provided food and temporary shelter. Papi then returned to the shore and found Degas. Degas said he still couldn't believe what he had done to Cellier and that he planned to stay there. However, Papi was still determined to go to Paris. On his way, Papi saw a police car, and he quickly went back to tell Degas. Unfortunately, Maturet had been shot and killed during the fight. Meanwhile, Degas and Papillon were taken back to prison. The cruel warden sent Papillon to Devil's Island. On this island, there were more insane people than sane ones. Shortly after, Luis Degas approached him. Degas had been living on Devil's Island for 5 years. He spent his days painting the walls and ceilings of his room, including a painting of Papi with a butterfly tattoo on his chest. Luis Degas then started preparing food and drink. The next morning, he took Papi to fetch water. Soon after, Papi climbed the stairs to the island's edge, still holding on to hope for freedom. The following day, Papi took Luis Degas to the island's edge. Papi threw an old coconut into the sea, watching it drift away. Then, Papillon and Luis Degas constructed a raft from coconuts placed inside 2 burlap sacks. That night, they prepared for their journey and then set off the next morning. They carried the raft to the island's edge. As Papi assembled the raft, it became clear that Luis Degas had no intention of escaping. He had done everything just to help Papillon. They embraced, saying goodbye forever. This was Papillon's 3rd escape attempt. Papillon continued to drift in the middle of the ocean. In short, the scene changed, revealing that Papillon had successfully escaped and eventually became a Venezuelan citizen. Papi then visited a publisher's office and submitted several books about his life story. One of Papi's books was adapted into the film Papillon, which is now the film you're watching. Thus, the story comes to an end. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe. Because by subscribing, you have supported me to make better videos. See you in the next video.